There
All
you
right,
go.
so we're on chapter 17 on the religious life. And I like the juxtaposition of doing the morning Advaita class, which is, really high philosophy, high truth. It's a very high level class as far as the approach to the divine or to seeing the ultimate reality. And then this the Vedic Christianity class, which really brings it down to everyday life.
Mhm.
It really talks about the details of living, the rules and the kind of the methods and the things to watch out for and kind of how to deal with the daily practice.
Mhm.
And of course, it's centered on the bhakti yoga, the path of devotion. And all the religions that have a personal God and have an incarnation, have our bhakti traditions. And when you get into a bhakti tradition, they're very similar, and you can easily see your own ideal within them. So it's quite fascinating, and how they developed on their own, following the same teachings
Mhm.
of the path of bhakti that is thousands of years old. 10,000 years old. Just goes way, way, way back. So, on religious life, if you want to get along with others, so that's the level we're going to be talking here. We're going to accept the fact that the world exists and that we exist in it, and that we are part of the reality, and even part of the ultimate reality. That this isn't going to resolve into something different than what it seems to be. And so through a relationship with God as person, we grow in our love, and it's that love that leads us to the unity of all things, tied together in that love. And so, in order to develop our loving nature, this is the level that we're going to be talking from. So, if you want to get along with others, it is necessary to curb your own will in many things. Compromise is the way forward, right? It seems like we would know that, but you look at our politics right now and you realize we're having to learn this lesson again. That if we want to get along with each other, we have to curb our own wills. We can't insist on our way for everybody. It has to be a meeting of the minds. And in the spiritual practice, this is how we reduce ego. In bhakti yoga, you don't eliminate ego. You just simply reduce it and redefine it. You put it in its proper place. It becomes the lover or companion or servant of God or family member. God as family member. And so it's approaching that relationship and using the nature of the incarnation of Jesus, using the nature of Jesus to help us understand what we really are, to help us see an example of what we are if we had pure mind, mind with no me and mine in it. And so this is the way of getting there, curbing your own will in many things. That's part of the process of reducing ego, which will allow us to have a deeper experience of the divine. It is not easy to live in a monastery or a congregation, to remain there without complaint or reproof, and to persevere in your vocation. It's a challenge when you're in a group of people, whether it's a monastery or just the center, one of the Vedanta centers, or church that you're going to, or temple, or congregation, or even any grouping. And so this is an ongoing practice for us to use one another. In the Old Testament, it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. So this being together, and through our fighting and having to apologize and having to, compromise and to let go of being right, in our own minds, all of that is practice, and it's a practice that is slowly training and shaping the ego to be like the ego of the avatar or the incarnation, like Jesus, becoming like Jesus. And so we get the title of this book, The Imitation of Christ. So we start out with imitation, and that leads to becoming. We realize that through this imitation, that we are once that purity, that lack of me and mine begins to develop in ourselves, we start to realize that we are by nature loving, because God is love and we are that image of God. And we start to recognize the qualities, and they begin to manifest freely in us at some point. As that relationship develops, you start to become like Christ. The ideal in Christianity, St. Paul says several times, but he says it in the New Testament, it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Right? So you begin to understand that the ego self is not as powerful as it seems in the beginning, and ultimately gives way to the presence of God in you, manifesting through you. So at the beginning, it's imitation. At the beginning, it's, curbing your anger, curbing your jealousy, curbing your arrogance, curbing your will, trying to just compromise and be at peace in a room full of people. And through that practice, you're actually cleaning the little lens from which you see the world, to a point where you begin to then understand the nature that the incarnation, that Jesus is the ideal of you. You as a perfect being would be a Jesus. And so he's saying that sometimes it's difficult, but you've got to do this. You've got to learn to be around people and to get along with them. If you wish to remain steadfast in grace and to grow in virtue, consider yourself an exile and a pilgrim in this world. You must rejoice to be considered a fool and a contemptuous person for the love of God. All right, so he's showing, if you want to remain steadfast in grace, this is oh boy, this is so fundamental. Being steadfast in grace. It's very interesting here, and a very important point, that we're not steadfast in our own performance. Our own performance is inspired through being steadfast in grace, where we learn to accept the grace of God. Because to accept a gift from somebody, you have to be humble to accept a gift. And the greater the gift, the more the humility that is necessary. The more you have to let go of your resistance. Oh, I can't possibly accept this. You can't. This gift is too much. I'm not really at the root. I'm not worthy of this gift. And instead of rejecting the gift, the practice is the acceptance of grace. And if you want to remain established in that, and consequently to grow in virtue, because accepting grace, feeling this action of the love of God on yourself, is how you grow in virtue. Your response to that grace is a natural response, right? And so we couple our imitation, our efforts to curb our ego and our will, we couple that with an acceptance of grace. We temper it with the acceptance of grace, and that's what gives us our sincerity. That's what gives us our earnestness. It is the acceptance of this grace. And to grow in virtue, consider yourself an exile. No, this is in the Vedantic language, this is kind of knowing that this world is unreal in a sense. So the Vedantist is thinking in terms of the unreality of the world, whereas, and we do that through the study of its impermanence. And in this relationship with Christ here, you're seeing this world as being unreal because you're in exile. You're in exile from the garden, or in exile from the kingdom of God, or from heaven, however you want to look at it. That you've been exiled here for a while, and so it's not your own place. Don't get comfortable in the world. Don't seek your comfort in the world. Don't look for things to be nice in the world for you, because Jesus says, wherever your treasure is, wherever the things are that you value, there your heart is also, right? And so if you go around in this world trying to build a beautiful home and trying to, get all the things that you desire and to collect all of these things, that's where your heart is going to remain. And this includes everything, we try and overlay Christ on everything. So the things of the world that are necessary, we overlay Christ on them, or we do them in response to this divine grace. So you have to consider yourself an exile and a pilgrim. A pilgrim, we're on our way to our, to our God. We walk in His shoes. In a pilgrimage, not so much of physical places, but a pilgrimage to the inner manifestation, to the inner reality of the relationship with Jesus, the relationship with God. You must rejoice to be considered a fool, right? So you don't form and honor the ego self. You don't seek out honor. You don't seek out power. You don't seek out your own way. You rejoice, you celebrate things that humiliate the ego, that deface the ego, because the ego is not the ideal. The presence of Christ within is the ideal, and your own ego is blocking that. It's not allowing that to flow. So you must rejoice to be considered a fool and a contemptuous person for the love of God. You anything that's serving God, if you get laughed at for it, this is one of the things that's probably a little bit overly emphasized in a weird way, actually. The suffering for Christ. You're willing to go through anything to be the person you need to be. And if it's not popular with people around you, or you get taken advantage of because of it, or you get, laughed at or pointed at because of it, you have to rejoice in that. You have to let that go, because that is how we train ego. That's how we mold it. That's the fulfillment of the statement, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. We use our difficulty in life to train ourselves in our recognition of Jesus within us. So you must rejoice in being considered a fool and a contemptuous person for the love of God. I don't think that means go and say yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Swamiji. I'm not quite following. I follow the foolish idea.
Right.
Contemptuous. Can you dig into that a little more? We're seen as contemptuous because we don't involve ourselves with the world. Like, people think we're maybe aloof and head in the clouds, or not joining the crowd. So is something wrong with that person? Is that?
Yeah, well, a lot of times, if you live a righteous life, this is a careful path here. A lot of times, if you're living a spiritual life, you're not participating in the life of the world, the life of the enjoyment of the world. So, and a lot of times, people who are going to be offended by that. They're going to feel judged by that.
We're not
And you're
joining in the gossip of the day or something.
right. Yeah. Or you go to the office party and you won't get drunk with everybody else, or, different things like that. People will begin to kind of poke at you, and to some degree, to their degree that they love the world, they're going to react contemptuously toward, or see, and they're going to project that contemptuousness on you, but they're going to get riled by that. They're going to get provoked by that. Some are, many aren't, but some will. And you have to, because you're doing this for the love of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to put that in there, that you're doing this for the love of God.
Because there's ego. Our ego could easily get pricked here, right?
Our ego can get fed. Yeah, the ego will get pricked for sure, but the ego can also get fed in this process. And that's why you have to be very careful. You can't take on those things as your ideal. Your life can't be, I'm not this. Oh, I'm not that. Oh, I'm not that. Your life is for the love of God. So it's for love. And that will give you a very different flavor. You know, that will prevent you from taking on the identity, which is very negative and very haughty and quite
Yeah.
often very judgmental. And if you're judging folks, you're not doing it right. This is about what you're doing and how you're living, and you're willing to take it on the chin to live in a way that you think is right. This is not the looking over the neighbor kind of looking over the wall at your neighbors kind of Christianity, where you're judging what they're up to, you're demanding their behavior change when they're not even devotees of Jesus, of the Christ, you know, and that you don't go into their lives to mess with their lives and to demand their behavior changes. You work your way into their lives through love, you know, by loving them. That this judging and separation is a misunderstanding of the manifestation of Christ within you. You know, Christ didn't go around. He was known for his love. And he even says that they'll know that you're my disciples by your love. And if people aren't seeing that as your primary self, you're not doing it right. And that's why I say this is a very delicate teaching here. It's one you have to walk carefully, because if you don't do it with love as the primary exhibit in yourself, then ego is being fed in you, and separation begins to be the root or the fruit of the way you're living. Oh no, I don't hang out with those people. Oh no, you know, I don't approve of those people. Where approving and not approving of people is not your business. That's not the focus of your religion. Your religion is to live your life and to enhance your sense of righteousness, motivated based on love, which is motivated and based on your understanding that you are nothing and can do nothing. And the only value that you have is given to you by the grace of God, that it is the grace in you that is the evidence that you are worthwhile, that God has loved you. And out of that knowledge, you return that love through service to everyone and everything. Right. And so we often get confused because Jesus and Paul, like in Corinthians, he'll tell people, you know, he says he'll say that you shouldn't even eat with someone who calls themselves a Christian, but who is not making the changes in their life. You know, that they're sticking, they're hypocrites. They're sticking to their desires and to their love of the world, and not manifesting Christ. And that's where he tells you to be judgy, and where he tells you to separate from people like that. But that's because those people are professing to be Christians or professing to be disciples of your ideal, and are not being true to it. And that's where you get a lot of those judgy teachings in the Bible. And people misunderstand those judgy teachings to apply to worldly people, to people who don't profess to be Christians, people who don't profess to follow your ideal. And that is not that's not an accurate teaching. You're that way with people who are on the path, who will have a framework to understand your edginess with them, you know. But even behind that, there has to be a love for God. So, you know, I really take issue with going out and thinking that you have to keep your eyes looking over the neighbor's fence to make sure that their life is Christian-like. Because what happens when you do that is you take your eyes off of your own life and you become more concerned about the people around you. You know, the people around you. And so you have to keep that tempered. You know, I'm trying to say that, you know, I think Christianity as it's practiced, and you shouldn't make generalizations, because it's not everywhere, and it's not 100%. There are wonderful inspired Christians out there, But the tenor of Christianity in America at this point is this judgy, pointy, you know, I not like that. You know, you are known to be a Christian because you exude love. Love is not judgy. Love does not form boundaries. Love does not encourage difference. Love sees that unity of the image of God in everyone and encourages it. It looks for good and it fans the flame of that good. And so if our relationship with Jesus is kind of veering off that path, which means we've forgotten the level of our own grace that God has given us, we have forgotten the depravity of our own self that required the sacrifice of God for us to come to reach us. That if we are in that state, we have to sit and focus on that love. You know, when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, when he was hanging on the cross, his prayer was, forgive us, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. You see the compassion in that. He didn't draw attention to the divisiveness. He didn't draw attention to the violence. He didn't draw attention to their you know, way of living or whatnot. He didn't judge them when he did. He said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. That is the way that a bhakta, someone who's practicing the yoga of devotion, approaches the world. Father, you know, there's ignorance everywhere. Please forgive this ignorance, you know, and a prayer to God to forgive ignorance is a prayer to yourself to forgive ignorance. It's part of that whole imitation thing that we started with, coming to that knowledge of being established in grace so that our virtue can increase. Our growth as someone who's devoted to God and an incarnation of God is to become like that incarnation in the sense of getting rid of any sense of me and mine. You know, the incarnation describes itself as a whole through which God is seen. So an incarnation is not a personality. It's not a person in history. The incarnation is God in his purest form, manifested as a body, as a human being. So living in this world in exile and embracing challenges to the ego by letting it produce humility. So we rejoice in being challenged. We like it when the hammer of God's chisel knocks at our ego to bring out the form of himself naturally within us, the form of herself naturally within us. Number 2, receiving the habit and the tonsure is but little help. So the externals, you know, just putting on the garb of a monk is of little help. It is the reforming of your life and the dying to self-love that makes the true religious. So real religion is right there. It's the reforming of your life and dying to your self-love, dying to your egoism, dying to the idea of having an identity separate from the divine love, separately from the divine itself. It's no longer I who live. Again, it's the same a different way of saying that teaching, so that God is manifesting in you, and God's nature is an unconditioned love. You know, which is how we know that it's not judgy and picky. That it's a manifestation of that pure love. It is the reforming of your life and the dying to self-love that makes it the true religious. If you seek anything in religious life other than God and the good of your soul, you will find nothing but trouble and grief, and you will not persevere there in peace unless you strive to be the least and to be subject to all. Right? So as a practicing bhakta, as you know, in this scripture, a practicing lover of Christ, you should strive to be the least in the room, which means you are the most humble. You're not the one exerting your will. You're not the one demanding your way. You're not the one telling everybody else what to do. that you are silent and stable and dignified, and manifesting a gentleness, manifesting a forgiveness, a peacefulness in the room, and that you're noticed for that. You're noticed for the presence of love. You're not noticed because you're making the most noise, or because you're yelling the most right things, or you're demanding the highest forms of righteousness. That's not it. That's not what we're going for. So if you seek anything in religious life other than God, other than pure love, pure wisdom, pure being, if you're looking for anything else out of that religion, if you're looking for identity, if you're looking for your own whatever, that's not it. Don't become the Saturday Night Live church lady. Don't. That's a very old reference, I guess. Google it. If you're under 50, Google it, YouTube it, you'll find it. So if you seek anything in religious life other than God and the good of your soul, you will find nothing but trouble. That's exactly right. It's just going to be a problem for you. And grief, right? Because it's not, in the Vedantic sense, you're not seeking out your nature. You're seeking out things that are contrary to your nature, and that hurts. So if your life is full of that, then it's Sri Nisargadatta says that's an invitation for some interior inspection. Go and look and say, am I seeking out love? Am I seeking out the good of my soul? And what is your soul? Your soul is the image of God. Am I seeking out the things that allow me to manifest the pure love of the divine? And you will not persevere there in peace. You're not going to be a source of peace for the people around you unless you strive to be the least, right? You're the guy who just gives up. You're the one willing to compromise. You're the one willing to help. You're willing to set yourself aside for the betterment of others. You're willing to let go of what you think is right for the betterment, for the peace of the room, to a degree, to a degree. And that degree depends on the importance of the issue, right? The most important things are the things that love would do. You don't compromise on those so much. And funny thing is you probably won't be asked to compromise on those things too much. People enjoy someone who is motivated by love, somebody who's motivated by humility. And that's exactly what he's saying. That if you aren't motivated by those things in reaction to grace, there's not going to be much peace for you. You're not going to persevere, meaning you're going to get beat up and eventually give up. Right? And so you need to strive to be the least and the subject to all. You're not the king of all, you're the subject of all. So you see the divine king in everyone around you. You see the presence of God to the degree that you're able to see the presence of Christ within you. To that degree, you're going to see the presence of Christ, your ideal, in others. And that's that whole notion of looking for the good and fanning the flames. Looking for the good and fanning the flames. It is good, therefore, often to remember that you entered religious life to serve and not to be served, and that you are called to suffer and to work, not to waste your time in idleness and gossip. In a religious life, you are meant to be tried as gold in a furnace, and that you will not last long unless with all your heart you are ready to humble yourself for the love of God. Right? So again, it's going to be a challenge because the ego, God does not exist to build up your ego. He doesn't exist for you to build up your sense of your small self, the self that ate of the knowledge of good, of the tree of good and evil, right? The knowledge of good and evil is that tendency for separation, for division, and egoism is the fruit of that tree. That is what we eat when we eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. We consume egoism. And when you do that, you'll find yourself then judgy and mean and separating out this, that, and the other. That's for, you leave that to the divine. So remember, you entered religious life to serve and not be served. That you are called to suffer and to work, not to waste your time in idleness and gossip. You're meant to be tried. You're meant to be turned into gold, which means the heat's going to get hot, which means your edges are going to melt, which means you're going to lose your sense of form, meaning the body, because that gold becomes liquid, right? And then can be crafted by God into whatever is needed to be served, to serve. You're meant to be tried as gold in a furnace, and you will not last long unless with all your heart you are ready to humble yourself. That's the be subject to all in that previous chapter, and to be the servant of all, as it started in the beginning of this chapter. And you are ready to humble yourself for the love of God. You humble yourself for the acceptance of the love of God. Not that God has to love you or accept you, but that you are accepting the gift of the divine. That's where we find the inspiration to become what we dream of being. Someone who's free of me and mine. Someone who is motivated by love alone in this world, love and wisdom. Yes.
Swami, he talks about giving up yourself, serving and suffering. But
yes.
I have a little issue with the suffering idea, because when you do give up yourself for God, you get joy. You don't get suffering in the way. So I'm confused by why he chose to say suffering as part of that.
He's talking to people that haven't arrived at that yet, where not being popular is going to be suffering for them, where not indulging in worldly life with their high school buddies is going to cause suffering for them. So this is really a teaching in more the first part of the path, when living right is hard, where doing right is suffering.
I can understand that, because in coming here, I had two friends that lived in this neighborhood, so to speak. They both gave me up because they decided I was too religious.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I don't see either of them anymore for that reason. And it's like, wow, okay. But I'm not going to change because, that's what they want me to do. It's like, no, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So those things that you do for love, you don't give up. Those things that other people do for their loves, you may be forced to give up. You may have to let go, because they're just going in a different way, interested in different things. They're learning the same thing, but in a different. They're going to take the painful route. Instead of letting go, they're going to have to watch it be torn from their fingers. So it's very difficult. But we treat that with compassion as we go along. So yeah, he's talking about this part of the practice where you're still pretty much the world is still very attractive to you. He's talking to people here where the world is, they still think that there's something there to renounce, right? Where someone who sees the world as it is, the renunciation is, it's not renouncing a good thing. It's letting go of this wilchi thing in order to grab the beautiful, to grab God. And so renunciation, mature renunciation is never about what you're leaving behind. Mature renunciation always keeps its eye on why it's throwing those things away. You're getting rid of the scissors to hold the ball. You're getting rid of these things of division and separateness and enjoyment in order to grab the unity of a pure love. So we always keep our eye on what we're going toward, because we're leaving the other stuff, because we're realizing its nature. We're realizing that it's meaningless, and that its ultimate result is suffering in the world. If everybody's running after lust and greed, it's going to be a very competitive, divisive, selfish world. And so he's saying that we don't want to go there. So those people who love gold and lust, when they begin spiritual life, they suffer. The beginning part of it is very difficult because you haven't yet seen the nature of what you're leaving behind. You're attracted to God, for sure, but you haven't yet begun to see the violation of your nature that your vices are. And so you still hurt from them. But the love of God is where we keep our eyes, even when we're suffering in that. We just always keep our eyes on the love of God. That's the foundation. That is the one most important thing. If you do that, all of the other knots will be combed out. If you live for love, forget your doctrines, your dogmas, your creeds. You know, if you can't remember all that stuff and you don't want to get lost in that stuff, remember love. Remember love, remember love. Love will take you to the feet of your divine beloved. And so that is by creed of every religion, a statement very clearly made. Love is the first and foremost commandment. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. That's the test. Are you loving your neighbor as you love yourself? Are you and really that grows into a singular commandment as you grow and understand your nature and the nature of the world, that you begin to see God in all beings. You know, when Jesus says when you gave a drink of water to the least of these, you gave a drink of water to me. You know, he says that on Judgment Day in the Revelation, when he tells the people that didn't live with this idea of getting rid of ego. He tells them, you know, when I was hungry, you didn't give me anything to drink. When I was in need of clothing, you didn't clothe me. When I was needing food, you didn't give me food. And the rich folks are standing there saying, what do you mean? What are you talking about? You know, if you were there, I didn't even see you. Where were you? What are you saying? I didn't give you all these things. And Jesus says, in the way that you did not give it to the least of these, you did not give it to me. Right? And so that infers our highest ideal is to see the presence of Christ in everyone, everything, the least of these, the people that it's the hardest to see that image in, we see that image in them. And we serve that image in them. And we fan the presence of that image in them by our own love, which comes from the image of that within ourselves. So the degree you can see it in yourself, to that degree you'll be able to see it in others. And I say that so that you don't think your mission is to shine up their image, you know, to force the hand. It's to shine up your image, because if you're seeing it here, you're going to see it there. Right? And so keep that focus. That's how love expresses itself. All right, chapter 18. On the examples given by the Holy Fathers. Look at the shining examples of our ancient fathers and the saints, in whom true perfection and religion flourished, and then you will see how little we do by comparison. How can we even compare our life to theirs? So this is again an exercise in humility by accepting the love of the saints, by the great folks out there. You know, so we don't just keep Jesus as the ideal. You know, say, we can be inspiring to each other, and not just ourselves. You know, that happens only when we're really practicing seeing the good, because it's kind of hard to see that in most of us. But this is going to the scriptures. This is reading the stories of, you know, all the disciples, reading the stories of the church fathers, you know, reading the stories of the monastics who have dedicated their lives solely to the manifestation of this love of God. And to just seeing how they flourished, seeing how they endured some of the most radical suffering in the world, and we're unbroken by it. We're unfailing in it. It didn't. That wasn't the important thing to them. Love was always the most important thing, and it seems the more difficult their life became, the more pure the love that flowed from them, because the ego was being just annihilated, by that suffering, being transcended by that suffering, through that suffering. These friends of Christ served him amid all sorts of tribulations: hunger, thirst, heat, cold, labor, weariness, in vigils and fasts, holy meditations and prayers, and in persecutions and insults. So this whole notion that in whatever is happening to the body, to the outside world, you are in the shrine of the heart. Even in Christianity, they have that idea that we read in the Rig Veda, that the body is a temple. And what is in the temple? The presence of God. And what is that presence of God, even in a Christian? It's that image of God that he placed in you when he created you. And so to honor that and to look for that and to serve that, and let Christ, who is the highest image of that God that is placed within us, becomes recognized in our inner shrine. So we sit in that space, and all of these externals, they're the stuff that are happening outside the church while you're in singing your traditional praises and doing your meditations and taking your communion and doing all those things. And, all of those things which are only reflections of the real, that you are communing with God within the heart of yourself all the time. You are a friend to Christ in the heart all the time. And so that is where your energy is, and that's where your focus is. And the rest of it, whatever's going on out there, it goes on out there. You aren't paying attention to that. You are in the shrine. Consider the many grievous trials endured by the apostles, the martyrs, the confessors, the virgins, and indeed all the saints who followed in the footsteps of our Lord. In order to possess everlasting life, they rejected honors and all the pleasures of this life, right? So in order to possess the things that last, right, the things that are of the unchanging nature within you, not the things that are of the changing nature within you, that they possessed an everlasting life, and they rejected honors. Anything that fed the ego, anything that fed themselves as being separate and apart from God, separate and apart from love, those are the things that they went to war with, that they just let them drop, let them die, and kept the entire time this friendship with Christ within, this service in the shrine of the heart, and to follow in the footsteps, to go where he goes, to do what he does, because he is, in Christianity, he is the nature of love, of a pure love. So you're following in the footsteps of a pure love, right? And it's good to keep that focus also, to reduce fanaticism. Name Jesus what he was, not the historical figure, not the personality. Name him what he was, the purest manifestation of an unconditioned love. That's what you're following. That's what you're trying to manifest in yourself, to allow out of yourself. That's what you're trying to recognize, so you can find the image of God that lives within you and begin to understand that the divine will is your will, not the other way around. That the divine will, this emanating love from the image of God within the temple of your heart, which bears the name of Christ, is what you are, and to allow yourself to be that by not being the ego. How strict and mortified was the life of our fathers led in the wilderness, right? Because we see this whole world as the wilderness, just You look out, even in a non-religious way, this world of unknowing, that we have no, what are we? Where are we? What's going on? What is this experience of being? Why am I pulled in thousands of different directions and everything burns my fingers? Everything is unsatisfying. I'm always hungry. No matter how much I have for breakfast, I have to eat again. And to eat again, I have to work, to get more money. All even my fundamental needs are effort, constant. This is the wilderness, that we're living in. So how strict and mortified, mortified meaning they were doing away with the things of the body, and they were very strict on this, keeping that vision inside. Again, they weren't looking at their mortification. They weren't sitting there looking, indulging in mortification for the sake of mortification. They were deeply in love, and it was causing or emanating the dropping off of the other, the body, the mind, and its desires and hungers and thirsts. How strict and mortified was the life of our fathers, led in the wilderness, led because their eyes were constantly, you take that Old Testament where God became that pillar of fire at night and was a cloud during the day, so that they led the Jews through the wilderness. That story of the Exodus in the Old Testament, the story of the deliverance of the Jews, is actually the story of the process of spiritual life. All the things that God demanded of them as he led them through that wilderness, that was metaphor for how he is leading us through this world of delusion, through this world of suffering, through this world of difficulty. And he can only lead you if you keep your eye on that. Keep your eyes on that manifestation, that divine love, that beautiful life of Christ, the beautiful life of the saints and the people who have dedicated themselves to that. How many grievous temptations they endured, and how the violent assaults of the devil, and all of us have been through that, when the ego wants something and you're trying to deny it. Good Lord, there's turmoil in there as you try and find that strength from any source, from anywhere, to stand against the winds of lust and the winds of greed, the winds of pleasure, to try and find the things of the body. Very difficult, it is exactly how he describes here, grievous temptations. Those times when the body just won't leave you alone, or the mind, that anger, you're trying to get over your anger and it just won't leave you alone, and you're just beaten by it, because you just can't let go. You can't transcend it. The need for drugs, once you've gone into that bad habit and you're trying to break out, your need for alcohol, we see in Girish Ghosh, all these pullings of the ego. It's very helpful, especially if you're Vedantin, it's very helpful to keep in mind that the devil and ego are really the same, that the devil is a manifestation of an impersonation or an anthropomorphizing of the ego, that it's the thing that is based on lust and greed as its ideal. And we're really trying to push against that. We're really trying to put that to death, but we're not doing it by fighting it. We're doing it by keeping our eyes on the one most important thing that will then take our attention off of the body and off of the mind and place our attention in the heart. That's how the devil is defeated, by keeping your eyes on the one most important thing and not looking at the others. When you start looking at the others, meaning lust and greed and the manifestations of pleasure in the world, when you start looking at that, you forget the love of Christ, you forget the grace, you forget the nature of unconditioned love. And those things then begin to look attractive because they mimic all of that, but they are not that. How fervently they prayed, right? There's our number one. That's the number one right there. That inner communion, that sitting in the presence of the image of Christ within you, that calling out to God. How fervently meaning they really meant their prayers. They weren't praying one thing and doing another. You know, that's the cause of pain in our life. To call out for one thing and to serve another is a very, very painful place to be. So that would be some of the suffering we were referring to earlier. Our own insincerity, our own lack of earnestness is quite often our biggest cause of suffering inside. How many grievous temptations they endured and violent assaults of the devil, how fervently they prayed daily to God, imposing rigid fasts on themselves, you know, training that breaking of the will. You know, fasting is a form of body denial. You know, and again, it's dangerous because fasting can also feed the ego. You know, so fasting for its own sake can be an evil action. It really depends on the heart. Why are you doing it? Are you doing it to be seen by your fellow travelers, to being recognized for being a great devotee? You know, those are dangers, and they lurk around the edge. That ego is always trying to exert itself. In Christian language, that devil is always trying to find a way in to your chamber, inner chamber. So fervent prayer, imposing rigid fasts, meaning doing things as practice that will make you stronger, not for their own sake, but for the sake of manifesting love more purely in yourself. What ardent zeal to advance in the spiritual life. What relentless war they waged against all sin, you know, all vice, anything that was not love, anything that was not wisdom, right? They fought against that, raged. With what pure and wholehearted intention did they aspire toward God? Did they aspire toward that love, toward that being? Just, there was nothing else for them. They wanted that and that alone. And the death of the ego was their suffering, but it was also their freedom. You know, so this is why we fight, and this is why we endure, and this is why we keep getting up, even though we so often are aware or made aware of our compromise, of our danger. You know, we still endure because we've touched love. We know the nature of the beloved within. We know it's worth it. Because we look at these saints and we see their lives and we're in awe. We're like, oh my God, I would love to be like that. You know, I would love to be able to care earnestly about people. I would love to be willing to do what they did for me, you know. So it's that awareness and that communion. That's what communion is all about. It's sharing that love of this ideal and letting go of everything else. And the letting go is what we call renunciation. But we have to remember that that letting go is really about grabbing the greater, being dedicated to the greater. And in the process, we let go of everything that is less than that. All right. It's after whatever time, 8, I guess. In someone's world, it's 8 p.m. All right.